On April 26th, we're finally going to be able to see the highly anticipated main event between Ian Garry and Carlos Prates, and I feel like there have been a lot of mixed opinions from MMA fans on who's actually going to pick up the W here. Prates has looked like an absolute monster through his first 4 UFC fights. Ian Garry, on the other hand, I think has gained a lot of respect after taking that short notice fight against Shavkat and giving him his toughest test yet. So in this video, I'm going to be doing a full breakdown on this main event and then giving my winner pick at the end. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. Let me hear your picks down below. Who do you have winning? And then let me know your reasoning. But I think we should start off by just talking about how this fight actually came together because, up until a few weeks ago, this was not really a fight on anyone's radar. Carlos Prates was originally booked to fight Jeff Neal at UFC 314. Jeff Neal had to pull out of that fight instead of, rebooking him for that pay-per-view or just rebooking the Jeff Neal card. The UFC needed a vacancy for the Kansas City main event, which was originally supposed to be headlined by Jamal Hill taking on Khalil Roundtree. Jamal Hill had an injury. He needed to pull out. So then Carlos Prates, Ian Garry get the short notice call to step in for this main event. So it is worth noting that Carlos Prates has been in a camp preparing for a fight. He has been preparing for a 3-rounder. Now he's going to a 5-rounder. Ian Garry was not in camp. I'm sure he's training just based on the fact that he's taking this opportunity, but he's taking this on like 3.5 weeks notice, stepping into a main event, a 5-rounder that he was not in training camp for. Kind of a similar situation to the Shavkat fight, just with, way less upside from Ian Garry's perspective. So shout out to both of these guys for taking this fight, especially on the Ian Garry side, just coming off the couch. Both of these dudes are rising contenders in the welterweight weight class. Ian Garry has a 15-1 pro record. In the UFC, he is 8-1 with 3 knockouts, the only loss being his last fight against Shavkat, and he's currently ranked number 7. Carlos Prates, 21-6 as a pro, 4-0 in the UFC, all 4 wins by knockout, currently ranked number 13, coming off a knockout win against Neil Magny to get him in the rankings. I think there are definitely some similarities with their frames and their styles. Both are kind of tall, rangy welterweights. Ian Garry, 6'3", 74.5-inch reach. Carlos Prates, 6'1", 78-inch reach. So Garry has the slight height advantage. Prates has the reach. Both guys prefer to go out there and strike, but I do think they have slightly different, actual striking styles. So we'll start off here with Carlos Prates, part of this Fighting Nerds gym. The gym and Prates just have a ton of steam right now. The big four are currently undefeated, and Prates is a dangerous southpaw striker. He's extremely loose on the feet. His left hand is an absolute weapon, whether it is his straight left or just, his left hook. He is extremely powerful, also mixes in some nasty knees to the body. We saw him pick up that finish against Charles Radke with that knee. Very good front kicks to the body. Pretty good inside low kicks also. He's typically going up against orthodox fighters, so you don't have, that power leg kick available to the calf, but you can just go shin to shin on the inside, and typically that's something that does favor southpaws because southpaws are way more comfortable fighting against other righties. That's what they're seeing a lot. So they can go to that inside leg kick. It's not typically something that orthodox fighters are as comfortable doing. He has showcased some pretty solid takedown defense. That's kind of, been the recipe to try to beat him. You don't really want to stand at range with him, so you want to take him down. He has not allowed a single takedown in the UFC. I do think if we've seen any weakness so far out of Carlos Prates, it would just be his willingness to kind of accept the clinch and stay in there. We saw in the Neil Magny fight, I know he got him out of there in the first round, but there were a few minutes there where he kind of just accepted Neil Magny holding him up against the fence. So he has been very good at stopping the takedowns, but I do think can just spend a little bit too much time there. Also not great in terms of avoiding it. He can kind of overextend to get into those positions. Maybe doesn't manage distance as optimally as, he could if he did want to stay out of those clinch situations. I do think he's best moving forward when he can be the aggressor, really kind of, back his opponents against the fence. I think his defense gets a little bit sketchy, once he's retreating with extended combinations. We especially saw that in his UFC debut against Trevin Giles, but we're really nitpicking here. His first 4 UFC fights, he's looked pretty much flawless in those matchups. Now looking at Ian Garry here and his style, obviously, he's also a striker. That's his bread and butter. I do think he's a little bit more of a patient, safer striker. I think he's maybe a little bit more calculated in his overall MMA IQ. He is orthodox, so we're going to have southpaw versus orthodox here. Definitely doesn't pressure forward as much as Carlos Prates. We've seen a lot of his fights. He's very willing to kind of, have someone pressure him. He has very good footwork, kind of circling around the cage. He's going to throw a ton of high volume straight shots, not someone who's going to go out there and throw looping punches. We're looking at a lot of jabs, a lot of straight right hands. Also a very clean counter striker, especially when he can slide back, land that straight right. I think he manages range extremely well. He's either like out at distance where, he's going to have the advantage because he's going to have that larger frame, or he's willing to clinch, where if you get too close, he'll just hold on to you, grab you. Not going to be super offensive in the clinch. Like, he's not someone who's landing huge shots there, but he's just not really putting himself in danger, really at all in the UFC. He got clipped one time by Song Kanan, and I think Shavkat landed a big shot on him in round one. But for the most part, he has been very, very safe throughout his UFC career. He also has some decent experience against southpaws. 3 of his opponents in the UFC have been lefties: Jeff Neal, Gabe Green, Daniel Rodriguez. Now, it's obviously not mirror matchups because Prates just has a very different frame than a guy like Jeff Neal or Gabe Green. Both those guys are kind of shorter welterweights. Also D-Rod, honestly, they all kind of fit into the same bucket. But he didn't seem to have like any glaring holes going up against the southpaw. Seemed to be able to get his offense going and didn't have any like huge deficiencies in terms of his defense. Against those southpaws, I think we also got to see him, throw his body and head kicks a little bit more because it is open when you're going against the opposite stance. And then he also mixed in knees to the body that were pretty impressive. Not quite as explosive and powerful as Carlos Prates' knees to the body, but, still was able to work it in. And then he also does have that 5-round experience, like I talked about, going up against Shavkat, going the distance, and, winning 2 rounds off him, which is very, very impressive. I think the biggest difference in this matchup is Ian Garry's kind of grappling improvements that he's made and showcased over his last few fights, and then also just the willingness to actually engage in the grappling. Ian Garry does not fight with a big ego where he could go out there and think that he's the best striker in the world and just want to stand against these other great strikers and win that way. We've seen some fighters do that, right? Where maybe they fight against their best interest to try to show they're the best in one area. Jamal Hill against Alex Pereira, Khalil Roundtree against Alex Pereira. That is not going to be Ian Garry. He's not worried about going out there and outstriking everyone. We saw it in the Michael Venom Page fight. Wasn't super comfortable on the feet, was losing the exchanges, couldn't really close distance as effectively as he wanted to, and he won that fight being able to take Michael Venom Page down and, get on the back, control him there. We also saw he won the 5th round against Shavkat, defending a takedown, then getting on the back of Shavkat and really threatening him with a rear naked choke. It seemed like he was going to have some sort of like improbable comeback. I think Corey Sandhagen is a great example of a fighter who kind of came in primarily as a striker, but has really kind of improved his overall MMA skill set and has helped him in fights. Like we've seen in some of his recent matchups over the last few years, Song Yadong, Chito Vera, Rob Font, those are all fighters who I think would be very willing to just go out there and stand and bang with Corey Sandhagen, for 3-5 rounds, whatever it's scheduled for. But in all of those matchups, he was very willing to mix in the takedowns. And it's not like he was desperate to get them, right? Like he didn't have any success controlling Song Yadong in that fight. He did have success against Chito and Rob Font, but it just gives them something to think about. You have to be worried about the takedown. If you can log some control time like he did against Chito, Rob Font, it's going to help them drain the gas tank. You're able to bank rounds in that way. And so I think we're seeing Ian Garry kind of develop in a similar way, which I do think could help him in this matchup. So kind of just going through my overview here, I think Prates is going to have the edge in finishing upside. I do think he's the more powerful guy. I think he's the more dangerous striker. He's more explosive. I also think he's just more aggressive. So he's going to be more willing to like put himself out there, risk getting hurt, but he's going to go out there. He is going to hunt for a finish. On the other side, I think Ian Garry has the experience edge. I also think he has the edge in just being able to mix it up. I think Garry is going to make Prates think about the grappling way more than Prates is going to make Garry think. Like, I actually don't think Prates is going to try to initiate any grappling at all. We haven't seen him do it in the UFC. whereas we have seen that out of Ian Garry. Like I talked about, I do think Prates is just a little too willing to stay in the clinch. Also isn't the cleanest at like avoiding those situations. And then I think there are question marks here for Prates with how his gas tank will hold up over 5 rounds. We really haven't seen any cardio concerns in the UFC, but like he's also not even getting into the 3rd round. I know he's someone who openly smokes a lot of cigarettes. I don't know if that's actually going to be a factor, but it is just kind of an unknown where he's been finishing fights very quickly. We haven't really seen him be super uncomfortable. We don't know if he can go 5 rounds. We haven't even seen him go 3 rounds in the UFC. We do know that Ian Garry on short notice can, fight a top guy and still be able to go 5 rounds and win the 5th. So I think this is a great fight. I could see arguments for this going both ways. My prediction here is going to be Ian Garry by decision. I like the experience edge he has. I think some people think this is just going to be like 25 minutes of these two going out there standing and banging. Hopefully I'm wrong, but I don't know if Ian Garry is going to make this a super fan-friendly fight. I think there will be times where they're on the feet, but like we kind of saw in the Shavkat Ian Garry fight, Ian's, very willing to fight like a low volume, safe kind of performance. And I think when Prates does close the distance, I think Ian Garry's going to be looking to clinch, kind of trying to trip him up, find some takedowns. So I think he's going to stay safe. I think he can bank some rounds in the clinch, maybe land in a takedown here or there. And he is still a very, very good striker. He could be live for a finish. Prates gets frustrated, overextends. Like Ian Garry could find the knockout, but I am going to pick him by decision here. Would not be shocked if we saw a Prates knockout. The dude's extremely dangerous. I just think this is a little bit too quick of a step up in competition, and I think Ian Garry picks up the win. But let me know your thoughts. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me hear it down below. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.